Sitting on a worn bench in a forgotten square, Renato played the keys of an old grand piano, worn out and out of tune. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The effort visible on his face revealed the internal battle he was waging not only against the difficult notes, but against the time that, relentlessly, marked each chord with a touch of adversity. His wrinkled, tired hands moved with a precision that seemed to defy the frailty of his age, as if music were the last line of defense against a world that had forgotten him. Renato Vargas, descending from his luxurious sports car, walked with the calculated elegance that only wealth can provide. His penetrating, disdainful gaze swept the square with a mixture of boredom and contempt, the kind of gaze that tends to look for what might entertain, what might distract, and what might impress. He wasn't looking for beauty, but for something unusual to make his party, and by extension, his life, more memorable. It was then that his eyes fell on Renato, who was struggling with a melody that seemed as wandering as his own life. The contrast between Renato's opulence and Renato's simplicity was stunning, like a work of art that no one else seemed to notice. Renato stopped, his gaze fixed on the old musician, before approaching with a smile that was nothing more than a mask of superiority. "You play very well, despite the state of your piano," he said, his voice filled with a barely concealed condescension that revealed the disdain he felt for anything that wasn't polished by money. Renato, without looking away from the keyboard, replied in a weak and rough voice, "I don't have much to offer other than my effort and a little music." Renato bowed slightly, as if the old musician were an interesting specimen, worthy of careful analysis. "And what makes you think your music could be valuable to someone like me?" The question hung in the air, loaded with an implicit challenge. Renato hesitated, but the determination in his heart was unshakable. "Music is the only thing I have left," he said. "Sometimes she brings a little hope to those who hear her." Renato laughed, a sound that resonated like a cruel blow, cutting through the silence with the precision of a blade. "Hope? Look at you, sitting here, playing for no one, while I live in a mansion where all the money can buy whatever I want." For the first time, Renato looked up, meeting Renato's eyes with a sad but serene look. "It's not money that defines the quality of music, sir. It's the passion with which you play." Renato raised an eyebrow, impressed by the old man's audacity, but his expression soon turned into a mischievous smile. "I have an idea. How would you like to come play at my party? Let's see if your music can really make an impact." Renato, surprised and somewhat skeptical, asked, "Is your party an invitation?" "Yes, an invitation," confirmed Renato. "But don't get your hopes up. I'm doing this for charity. I want to see if you really have something special. Prepare yourself for a new scenario, and maybe I'll reward your effort in some way." Renato nodded, his heart beating faster. Without fully understanding what was behind the invitation, he accepted, believing that an opportunity to showcase his talent was something he could not waste. Renato walked away with a satisfied smile on his lips, knowing that he had created the perfect situation for his cruel plan. As he looked at Renato one last time, a thought crossed his mind. The idea of turning the old man into a kind of court jester to entertain his rich friends. The night was about to prove more complex than either of them could imagine. Renato Vargas's house was a monument to extravagance, located in the heart of one of Mexico City's most exclusive areas. The mansion stood out with its opulent architecture and meticulously manicured gardens. As night fell, golden lights illuminated the property, and an orchestra of smiles and laughter filled the luxurious halls. Renato, in contrast to the opulence that surrounded him, was a humble man. Upon receiving Renato's invitation, he prepared for the occasion with the sincere hope of showing his talent. He wore a worn suit, now cleaned with effort, but still marked by poverty. As he approached the mansion, his heart quickened, and his hands, which had already played the old piano in the square, trembled slightly. He was greeted by a stern-looking butler who guided him through the mansion's majestic hallways. Renato looked around with admiration and a touch of bitterness. The luxurious details, crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, elegant furniture, seemed like they belonged to a world he had only heard about. Now he was about to become the center of attention, albeit in a cruel way. In the main hall, Renato was surrounded by his guests. They were in an entertaining mood, enjoying cocktails and small talk. When Renato saw Renato approaching, a satisfied smile lit up his face. He stood up, his hands elegantly placed on his impeccable suit. "Ah, Renato, I'm glad you came," said Renato with a tone that mixed false cordiality with a certain cynicism. Renato, looking around with a growing feeling of insecurity, replied, "I appreciate the opportunity. I hope my music can contribute positively to your party." Renato made a grand gesture towards the improvised stage in a corner of the room. "Perfect. You're about to become the main attraction of the night. Everyone is eager to hear what you have to offer." Renato nodded, and with one last look at the guests who were beginning to approach the stage, he walked up with unsteady steps. The piano was an older model, a little dustier than the one he played in the square. Even so, he settled down on the bench, trying to maintain his composure in the face of the imminent humiliation. Renato watched as the guests murmured and laughed discreetly. He patted Renato on the back, falsely encouraging. "Get ready to shine, Renato, and remember, it's the way you play that everyone will value." Renato looked at Renato, noticing the amusement hidden in his gaze. Not knowing exactly what to expect, he took a deep breath and started playing the first note. Something about the piano's out-of-tune keys reacted unsteadily. The opening melody was far from perfect, and whispers and discreet laughter began to spread among the guests. Initially amused, the guests began to notice something different. There was something about those notes that seemed to speak directly to the soul. The audience became quieter, and attention was directed to Renato. Renato frowned as he observed the change in the atmosphere. What was supposed to be trivial entertainment was turning into an enigma. Renato, with each chord, seemed to connect deeply with the music. The mocking murmurs began to turn into murmurs of curiosity. What once seemed like a joke was turning into something deeper. Renato felt restless, his mind struggling to understand what was happening. The room, now immersed in silent attention, anxiously awaited the outcome of the presentation that Renato was about to deliver. Renato immersed himself in the piece with a renewed intensity. Chopin's improvised fantasy, known for its complexity and beauty, flowed from his hands with a passion he himself barely understood. The notes challenged the old piano, and the melody struggled to stand out from the out-of-tune sound. But with each chord, Renato seemed to extract something more, something deep and true. Renato watched with a mixture of surprise and perplexity. What started as an act of cruelty was turning into an experience he didn't expect. Friends who had previously laughed and joked were now silent, captivated by the intensity of Renato's expressions. The situation of mockery gave way to attentive attention and unexpected respect. Renato's eyes, once full of superiority, were now fixed on Renato with an increasing degree of curiosity. He didn't know what to think, but he felt that something great was happening before him. A woman in the audience, known for her appreciation of music, leaned over to a colleague and murmured, "Do you hear that? It's like he's telling a story with every note." His colleague, initially skeptical, nodded slowly, now with his eyes fixed on Renato. "True," he replied. "There's something almost magical about the way he plays, even with this old, out-of-tune piano." Each musical phrase was transforming the ballroom, once full of laughter and trivial conversations, into a room enveloped in a deep and respectful silence. Renato's music transcended the materialistic environment that surrounded him. The emotions that infused the notes began to touch the hearts of those present. Renato, uncomfortable with the sudden transformation, tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes betrayed the internal struggle that was going on. It didn't fit the scenario he had imagined. Leaving his friends behind, he slowly approached the stage, his expression now a mixture of disdain and perplexed admiration. Renato continued playing, his hands moving with a fluidity that seemed to defy the reality of the piano. The song, which had begun with a tentative beginning, now exploded into pure, vibrant energy. Each note seemed to vibrate in the air, touching not only the ears of those present, but also their souls. Renato got closer to the stage, trying to understand what was happening. He couldn't understand how a performance he had planned to be a fiasco was turning into a moment of beauty and connection. A young woman standing near the stage began to cry silently. Renato's music seemed to have struck an emotional chord she didn't know existed. She discreetly wiped away her tears, not wanting to interrupt the moment. The guests, who had previously been immersed in their own conversations and jokes, were now completely engrossed. Respect for Renato grew, and the atmosphere was filled with silent reverence. The contrast between Renato's image as a simple entertainer and the depth of his performance was palpable. Renato, watching the transformation, felt a growing pressure in his chest. The plan he had made to entertain his friends was falling apart, replaced by a moment of genuine wonder and reflection. He was faced with the reality that true greatness lay not in wealth or status, but in the depth and passion with which one lives life. The out-of-tune piano, far from being an obstacle, now seemed like a symbol of Renato's perseverance. Music, with all its imperfections and beauties, was creating a bridge between the old and the new, between poverty and wealth, between humiliation and honor. Renato slowly stood up from the bench, his eyes meeting Renato's. The man who had been treated as a piece of entertainment was now being seen in a new light. Renato, with a feeling of shame and admiration, felt an unexpected connection with the old musician. The silence in the room was finally broken by growing applause. Renato, moved and a little stunned, accepted the applause with a slight smile. The stage was now lit with new understanding and respect. The night was about to turn out to be something much more significant than Renato had ever imagined. The silence that followed the last note of Renato's piece was palpable, as if the music was still floating in the air, enveloping everyone in a blanket of contemplation. The room was immersed in a reverent stillness, a respectful pause that seemed to understand the depth of what had just happened. Renato, still sitting at the piano, was panting, his heart pounding with adrenaline and excitement. Renato, at the edge of the stage, his expression a mix of perplexity and shame, saw his cruel plan crumble before his eyes. He watched the scene with a growing feeling of unease. What was supposed to be a night of cruel fun was now revealed as a moment of profound beauty and truth. The guests, who had previously been laughing and chatting nonstop, were now in a state of astonishment. An older woman with bright eyes and a lively smile approached Renato. His steps were slow and calculated, his presence serene. She placed a gentle hand on Renato's shoulder and spoke in a voice full of emotion. "Your talent is extraordinary," she said, with a sincerity that made her voice tremble. "I've never seen anyone play Chopin with so much passion and truth. You brought a light to this party that I didn't expect." Renato slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting hers with a gleam of gratitude and humility. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied. "I just play how I feel, trying to share a little of my soul." From a distance, Renato watched with a growing sense of shame. He approached the stage, his steps hesitant. The night he had planned as an exposition of his own status was turning into an unexpected lesson in humility and human connection. When he got close to Renato, his voice was low and hesitant. "Renato, I didn't expect that," said Renato, his voice a little choked. "What you did here today was something I never imagined. I'm sorry I planned it so wrong." Renato looked at Renato with an expression of surprise and understanding. "You don't need to apologize, sir," he said. "Music has a way of touching people, regardless of the intentions behind it. Maybe, just maybe, its beauty can open our eyes to something greater." Renato, moved by Renato's words and sincerity, felt a lump in his throat. Turning to the guests, many of whom were approaching to congratulate and thank Renato, he noticed that the atmosphere was now charged with genuine respect and a new appreciation for the music and the person who performed it. A young man, who stood out for his passion for classical music, approached Renato and, with an admiring smile, asked, "You have an incredible talent. Have you ever thought about recording an album or performing elsewhere?" Renato, surprised by the proposal and the new attention, responded, "I've always dreamed of sharing my music with more people, but I never imagined an opportunity like this would arise. If there's a chance, I'd love to explore it." Conversations among the guests continued, now with a tone of enthusiasm and gratitude. Renato began to receive compliments and proposals, and the old feeling of humiliation was being replaced by a feeling of accomplishment and acceptance. The night, which began with cruel intent, was turning into a celebration of true art and humanity. Renato, watching with a heavy heart, realized that true wealth was not in displays of power, but in the ability to touch people's lives in a sincere and profound way. He approached Renato once again, offering a handshake, a gesture that now carried a meaning far deeper than any words could express. Renato shook Renato's hand with a look of understanding. Music, which had been the medium of his humiliation, was now becoming a vehicle of connection and transformation. Renato, now more humble and introspective, began to see the night with a new perspective. The next morning brought a soft, calm light to Mexico City. Renato Vargas's house, now silent and empty, still resonated with the echoes of the previous night. The party, which began as a spectacle of luxury and superficiality, transformed into a moment of deep reflection and connection. Renato, sitting alone in his luxurious living room, reflected on the events with a mixture of confusion and regret. "If you're willing, I'd like to help promote your music," said Renato, his voice full of determination. "You deserve a chance to showcase your talent to the world, and I want to be a part of that." Renato looked at Renato with a sincere smile, his words resonating with deep gratitude. "I gladly accept your support, Mr. Vargas. Your change in attitude is a gift to me, and I hope we can work together to share this message of beauty and connection." The meeting between Renato and Renato was a moment of transformation for both. Renato left Renato's house with a renewed sense of purpose and a new appreciation for simplicity and authenticity. Renato, in turn, felt a surge of hope and confidence, knowing that his music was finally receiving the recognition and support it always deserved. As the sun set over the peaceful neighborhood, Renato said goodbye with a hug, a gesture of respect and friendship. The journey, which began with an act of cruelty, was now turning into an association of true connection and transformation, and they were both looking forward to the future this new friendship could bring. The following month brought notable changes to Renato's life. Renato's proposal to help him promote his music was coming to fruition, and Renato's little house was full of activity and enthusiasm. Renato organized a series of events and engagements to introduce Renato to new audiences, and the transformation in the aging musician's life was palpable. On the morning of a special event, Renato was in his modest studio, now equipped with a better piano and some additional instruments, the result of Renato's generous support. "I was adjusting scores and rehearsing with renewed dedication. With each passing day, he felt more confident and fulfilled, feelings he had lost a long time ago." Renato arrived at the studio with an air of emotion and a gift in his hands. He walked in with a wide smile, his eyes shining with excitement. Upon seeing him, Renato stood up quickly, with a spark of gratitude and curiosity on his face. "Mr. Vargas, what did you bring today?" Renato asked, fixing his eyes on the gift Renato was holding. Renato placed the gift on the table and, with a smile, replied, "I brought you something special, a high-quality recorder. It's an investment in ensuring that your music can be recorded and shared with the world." Renato, with tears of joy in his eyes, played the recorder with reverent love. "This is an incredible gift. I don't know how to thank you enough." Renato, moved by Renato's response, placed a comforting hand on the old musician's shoulder. "No need to thank me. You earned this with your talent and passion. I'm just helping open doors to what you already deserve." With the new equipment, Renato began recording his performances and preparing an album. The events Renato organized attracted a growing audience, and Renato was becoming a household name in the local music scene. His music was beginning to touch hearts and inspire people, and the transformation in his life was evident in every note he played. At a particularly significant event, held in an elegant concert hall, Renato was ready for his most important performance yet. The room was full of a diverse audience, from music critics to music lovers, all eager to hear what Renato had to offer. Renato was among the guests, watching with deep pride and emotion. Renato, dressed in an elegant suit borrowed for the occasion, took the stage, his heart beating with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The audience was silent, awaiting his performance. He looked at the audience and, with a deep feeling of gratitude, began to play. The music Renato chose for the night was an original piece he had recently composed, inspired by his experiences and emotions. The notes flowed with a depth and complexity that reflected the journey he had taken, from humiliation and difficulty to fulfillment and hope. With each chord, the audience was immersed in a deep emotional experience. Renato played with an intensity and sincerity that resonated in the soul of each listener. Renato, sitting in the audience, felt a rush of emotions: pride, joy, and a sense of satisfaction at seeing the positive impact that Renato's music was generating. When the last note finally sounded, the room erupted in applause and cheers of admiration. Renato, with tears of excitement in his eyes, stood up from the piano bench and bowed to the audience. The ovation was warm and heartfelt, a recognition of the depth and beauty of her performance. After the event, Renato approached Renato, his expression brimming with pride and joy. "You were incredible, Renato. Your music deeply touched everyone here." Renato, still emotional, hugged Renato with a feeling of deep gratitude. "Thank you, Renato. Without your help and support, I would never have had the opportunity to share my music with the world." Renato smiled, feeling the importance of the moment. "The true gift is seeing the transformation you have brought to yourself and to all of us. Music has the power to unite and inspire, and you were able to demonstrate that to us all." As the night progressed, Renato and Renato talked about future plans. With Renato's growing success, they discussed additional recordings, tours, and opportunities to further expand his career. Renato was excited about the new possibilities and eager to explore the future that now seemed so promising. When the event came to an end, Renato and Renato said goodbye with a feeling of accomplishment and hope. The night was a testament to the power of music to transform lives and open hearts, and both were looking forward to what the future would hold for them. Renato's story, a story of rebirth and triumph, would continue to inspire and touch those who were privileged to hear it. The days turned into weeks, and Renato's name continued to gain traction in the local music scene. The transformation in his life was palpable, not just in his music, but in his own confidence and the way he walked the streets he once roamed like an invisible man. Now he was seen, recognized, and more than that, he was respected. Renato, in turn, was experiencing an equally significant change. The man who had once prided himself on his superiority and wealth now found himself humbly involved in a world he barely knew, but was beginning to understand and perhaps admire. He watched each of Renato's performances, feeling a mixture of pride and a newfound reverence for simplicity and authenticity. One day, after one of these presentations, Renato and Renato went to a quiet cafe, away from the spotlight and the hustle and bustle that were now part of Renato's routine. They sat at a table near the window, where the soft late-afternoon light illuminated their faces. The silence between them was comfortable, as if they were both deep in their own thoughts, but still connected. "I never imagined that my life would take this direction," said Renato, breaking the silence with a soft voice, but full of emotion. He looked at Renato, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and unwavering humility. "This all seems like a dream I never dared to dream." Renato, stirring the cup of coffee in front of him, smiled. "You deserve it all, Renato. The truth is that you always had this talent, this passion. I just helped open some doors." Renato shook his head thoughtfully. "Opening doors is a more powerful act than many realize. I have lived for a long time in a world of closed doors, and you have given me the chance to cross the threshold." Renato remained silent for a moment, absorbing Renato's words. "You know, Renato," he began, his voice tinged with an introspection that was unusual for him, "helping you made me realize that there is more to life than simply accumulating wealth or impressing others. It's been a lesson for me, too, maybe more than I'd like to admit." Renato smiled slightly, recognizing the sincerity in Renato's voice. Music has this power to transform us, to make us see beyond what's in front of us. The two men continued to talk, their words flowing with a naturalness that grew out of a friendship that, although unlikely, had solidified into mutual respect. They talked about the future, about new performances, the recording of the album that was in progress, and even about a possible international tour. But, between these conversations about plans and dreams, there were also deeper discussions about life, about the meaning of success, and about what really mattered. As time passed, the friendship between Renato and Renato became stronger. Renato began to become more directly involved in the practical aspects of Renato's career, helping to manage commitments and deal with increasing media attention. But what surprised Renato most was the way Renato, even in the face of fame, remained true to himself. A humble man, whose only concern was playing music that touched hearts. Then, on a starry night, after a particularly moving performance, Renato invited Renato to dinner at his mansion. The mansion, which previously symbolized the separation between their worlds, was now a place where Renato felt welcomed, almost as if he were part of it. During dinner, after relaxed conversations, Renato paused and looked seriously at Renato. "Renato," he began, "there's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I want you to consider something." Renato placed his fork on his plate. The expression on Renato's face indicated that the matter was important. "Tell me, Renato. I want you to allow me to finance a recording studio for you, a place where you can create and record your music with complete freedom. And not only that, I want this studio to also be a music school for young people who don't have able to afford a musical education, a place where your talent and story can inspire the next generation." Renato was silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what Renato was proposing. His eyes began to shine, but he hesitated. "Renato, this is incredible, but I don't know if I deserve all this." Renato smiled. "Renato, what you deserve or not is a question that has passed. What matters is what you can do with the opportunities you have. I believe you can do much more than just play your music. You can change lives, just as it changed mine." Renato took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Renato's words. Finally, he smiled, a smile that carried both emotion and acceptance. "I accept, Renato, and I will do my best to honor this opportunity." In the months that followed, Renato's studio was built, a place that quickly became a vibrant center of creativity and learning. Young people from all over the city came to learn from Renato, who became not just a mentor, but an inspiring figure, a living example of how music can transform lives. The studio, which was named Hope in Notes, became a symbol of everything Renato and Renato had learned on their journey together. And as Renato taught, recorded, and performed, Renato watched with pride, knowing he had found something far more valuable than any material wealth, a genuine human connection, fueled by passion and art. And so, the story of Renato and Renato, which began in a forgotten square and at a party destined for humiliation, blossomed into a friendship that transcended the barriers of status and wealth, proving that true greatness lies in the ability to touch the heart of others, whether through music or through acts of kindness. Life went on, but now both Renato and Renato knew they had found something neither of them ever expected, a shared purpose that brought them together in a deep and indissoluble way. The following months were marked by incessant activity in the Esperanza em Notas studio. The space became a sanctuary for young, aspiring musicians, many of whom had faced difficulties similar to those Renato had encountered in his youth. The classes he offered went beyond musical technique. They were life lessons about resilience, passion, and the importance of never giving up on your dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem. Renato, true to his word, not only funded the studio but also became a constant mentor and supporter. He visited the studio regularly, often bringing renowned musicians to collaborate with Renato and offer masterclasses to students. The personal transformation he had experienced continued to deepen. He had found a satisfaction he had not known before, the joy of seeing the lives of others improve through his actions. While the studio prospered, Renato's career also took on new dimensions. The album he recorded with the support of Renato was a success, and his music began to be heard in places he had never imagined reaching. The reviews were unanimous. There was something in Renato's music that touched people in a way that few artists could. It was the sincerity, the purity of expression of someone who lived for music, not for fame. Despite his success, Renato remained the same humble man that Renato had met in that forgotten square. He refused to let fame go to his head, focusing on studio classes and sharing his music with the world. For him, each new day was an opportunity to give back what life, in an unexpected way, had offered him. The friendship between Renato and Renato grew even stronger during this time. They began to meet regularly outside the studio, at dinners or long walks through the streets of a city that now seemed more alive and full of possibilities for both of them. These moments were a breather from their daily busyness, and a reminder of how much they had learned together. Renato, ever the businessman, discussed new opportunities to expand the reach of Renato's studio and music, while Renato himself, with his simple and focused heart, brought the perspective that the most important thing was the quality of what they did, not the quantity. Then, one day, as they walked through the neighborhood where Renato grew up, he stopped in front of an old church. The facade was weathered, but the walls still stood with dignity, a reminder of the past that had shaped his life. "I used to come here when I was a kid," said Renato, his voice full of nostalgia. "Not to pray, but to hide. This place was my refuge." Renato looked at the church with new interest. "And now? What does she mean to you?" Renato smiled slightly. "Now? Now, she's a symbol of where I came from and how far I've come. I think we all need a place like that, something that reminds us of our roots, so we don't forget who we are." Renato nodded, feeling the weight of Renato's words. "Have you ever thought about doing something here? Turning this place into something new?" Renato looked at the church for a long moment, as if he was considering the idea for the first time. "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe that's the next step." And so, without rushing, they started planning. The idea of transforming the church into a community center, a place where music, art, and culture could flourish, began to take shape. It would be a space where not just young people, but people of all ages could connect with art and, through it, with themselves and others. A place where Renato's music and that of everyone who passed by could continue to touch hearts and change lives. The plans began to take shape, and soon the church was undergoing full renovation. Volunteers from all over the city joined the project, attracted by the idea of transforming that space into something greater than the sum of its parts. The surrounding community, which once saw the building as a remnant of a forgotten time, began to see it as a symbol of hope and renewal. The opening day arrived with a mixture of expectation and excitement. The church, now revitalized and full of life, was full of people. Among them were Renato's former students, musicians he had inspired, and many others who, in some way, had been touched by his music. Renato, as always, was at Renato's side, watching with pride as he prepared to play the first note in this new phase of his life. When Renato took the improvised stage, silence fell over the crowd. He looked around, his eyes landing on Renato for a moment before returning to the piano keys. With a deep breath, he began to play. The music that echoed through the halls of the old church was a new composition, something he had created especially for that moment. It was a play that told the story of his journey, from desolate streets to concert halls, from days of despair to the discovery of a greater purpose. Each note, charged with emotion, reverberated through the walls, as if the church itself was breathing new life through the music. The audience was silent, absorbing every chord, every nuance. It was as if time had stopped, and in that instant, everyone was connected by something bigger than themselves. When the last note finally sounded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, like a wave, the applause began, growing in intensity until it filled the entire space. Renato, with tears in his eyes, stood up and bowed to the crowd. He knew, in that moment, that he had achieved something more than fame or recognition. He had found a home, a place where his music and his heart could always reside. Renato, with teary eyes, went to him and hugged him, a gesture that said more than any words could express. In that embrace was the entire journey they had walked together, all the lessons learned, all the lives touched. The Hope in Notes Community Center, like the studio, has become a beacon of hope in the city. Renato's music continued to resonate, not just on the walls of that space, but in the hearts of everyone who crossed its doors. Renato, in turn, found a purpose that transcended his previous ambitions, dedicating himself increasingly to causes involving art, culture, and education. The friendship between Renato and Renato, forged in the most unlikely circumstances, continued to flourish. They had found something rare and precious, a bond that, despite differences in origin and trajectory, had united them in a common purpose. And as their lives moved forward, they knew that together they could face any challenge, because they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true wealth lies in human connection and the ability to make a difference in the lives of others. And so, the story of Renato and Renato, which began with a simple gesture of generosity, turned into a saga of redemption, transformation, and, above all, friendship. A story that, like Renato's music, would echo for many years, inspiring all who heard it.